Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is paying terrorists and terrorist families. If you pay terrorists money after they're arrested, if you pay families of terrorists after terrorists kill themselves as suicide bombers, you are aiding and abetting terror, not fighting terror. It is that simple and clear. Despite claims that they no longer engage in the practice of offering monetary incentives and support to terrorists, the Palestinian Authority is still paying terrorists. They are still paying terrorist families and imprisoned terrorists. In other words, they lied. The stopping of payments for acts of terror was probably the most significant demand that President Trump put forth to Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas in both of their face-to-face meetings. Trump first articulated that demand in Washington and then repeated it in Bethlehem. One other major demand, by the way, was to stop, totally stop, the incitement of violence and glorification of terrorists and the acts of terror. Abbas actually assured Trump, while in Washington, that it had already stopped. But during their face-to-face meeting in Bethlehem, Trump called Abbas on his statement and gave him evidence that Israel had collected that the Palestinian Authority was still sponsoring terror. Has Abbas finally realized the importance of keeping his promises? That's not clear, but probably not, it seems that way at least. After the conversations between Trump and Abbas, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson testified before the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee that the Palestinian Authority is no longer rewarding acts of terror by paying terrorists and families of terrorists. The U.S. Secretary of State said, and I'm quoting here, "They have changed that policy and their intent is to cease the payments to the families of those who have committed murder or violence against others." He continued, "We have been very clear with them that this is simply not acceptable to us," unquote. Israel thinks otherwise. Jerusalem responded by saying that there has been no change, and if anything, evidence has shown an increase in anti-Israel propaganda and recruitment for terror. According to the official Israeli response, quote, "Israel does not recognize any change in Palestinian policy that continues to pay to the families of terrorists. The Palestinian Authority continues to praise, incite, and encourage terrorism through payments," unquote. The Israelis are taking it a step further. Israel said that they will calculate how much the Palestinian Authority pays to reward terror, and they will subtract that amount from the taxes they collect before they hand the remainder over to the PA. According to the Camp David Accords, all products coming into the PA come in by way of Israeli ports, where they are taxed. Israel then hands over the tax to the Palestinian Authority. They will subtract the terror money from that tax money. Terror payments from the PA government come to a significant sum. The Times of Israel calculated that sum to be $1.2 billion over 4 years. They were given so significant a sum that one of the best jobs a person can have in the PA comes with the job title terrorist. There is even a ministry in the Palestinian Authority dedicated to paying terrorists. It's called the Ministry of Prisoners' Affairs, and their function is to deal with the terrorist prisoners in Israeli jails and the families of terrorists. Not to be confused, Palestinian prisons do not come under this ministry. Issa Karaka, the Palestinian Minister of Prisoner Affairs, announced that calling for a stop of these payments was, and I kid you not, an act of war. He said, quote, "The Palestinian society is made up entirely of families of prisoners and shaheeds, and they are all victims because of the Israeli occupation." He continued, "This demand to stop payments for prisoners' families is no small matter, but something very big with social ramifications." Karaka also claimed that, quote, "No one in the Palestinian Authority could make such a move." And then for his finale, Karaka says, "It would be very difficult for the Palestinian Authority to stop the humanitarian aid to the families of prisoners and shaheeds," unquote. Karaka's words were directed against the United States. Israel has already begun to act to stop PA monies sent to terrorists. Elazar Stern, a member of Israel's Knesset from Yesh Atid, proposed a law addressing the issue of salaries of terrorists. The law passed its first reading with a vote of 48-13. Stern said, "When the PA transfers funds by law to terrorists and their families, it promotes a policy of murdering Israelis. The budgeting of terrorism is a clear political act, and it is not consistent with the peace process," unquote. There were two issues at heart here for Israel, and Israel must respond. The first is a quality of life issue. Israel cannot stand as terror directed specifically and exclusively at them is incentivized. Secondly, and more significantly, it's a moral issue. Israel cannot be party to terror by transferring money that rewards terrorists and their families for acting, maiming, and killing Israelis and Israeli families. One way or the other, incentives to terrorists must stop. If Abbas won't do it, if Trump cannot convince him to do it, Israel will do it on their own. This is something I've been thinking about since the very beginning of the past electoral season. While browsing in a Barnes & Noble recently, just the other day, I was assaulted. Not physically, not verbally, I was intellectually assaulted. It happened in the children's section of this megalith of literature and the culture where I went to search for a recently published children's book. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted a caricature of Donald Trump. It was the hairdo that attracted my eye. I saw this cool cartoon image of the 45th president of the United States on the red cover of a children's book entitled A Child's First Book of Trump, published by Simon & Schuster. I thought, how wonderful. Children will learn about the new president. Children's books are the perfect tools for teaching values, history, pride, through an entertaining medium. Children's books help mold attitudes and feelings and stimulate ideas and creativity. When I opened the book, reality hit. This wasn't a book about history in the making, about the majesty of the presidency, about the process through which elections are held. It was a book proposing to children that if we were to rid the world of Trump, it would be a better place in which to live. The message was grotesque. To say that the literature contained on those pages is only a wee bit shy of pre-Holocaust Nazi Germany is not an exaggeration. If Trump was replaced by the word Jew, the book would fit squarely into the genre of early Der Stürmer style messages. This message of the book, this book specifically, was pure hate. Shame on the author, shame on the illustrator, shame on Simon & Schuster, and shame on Barnes & Noble for carrying the book. The author and illustrator may have been driven by a political bias and motivated by political passion and virulent anti-Trump points of view. But what about the other adults in the equation? The adult and dispassionate players in the equation should have been the publishing house and the bookstore. This material should never have been published. Adults are supposed to say that our corporation does not embrace hatred, even hatred that is popular and in vogue with an influential segment of society. Adults say our company does not embrace hatred. Further along the shelf, the very same shelf, there was another children's book that caught my eye. This one was about Hillary Clinton. It was about hope, about change, about the future, about modeling behavior. Hillary Clinton was depicted as a hero, not a despicable, cartoonish buffoon. Children's books demeaning Trump go way beyond tasteless. They have a serious potential to damage. Adult jokes like the Donald Trump out-of-office countdown calendar or the Donald Trump toilet paper with his picture on every square are exactly what they appear to be, classic prank gifts. They might be funny and appropriate to some and distasteful to others, but they're not a tool to shape young and impressionable minds. To be fair and honest, a child's first book of Trump is not the only book about the president one can buy. There's also a book published by Here and Now entitled Donald Trump, America's 45th President. On the cover is the president standing at his desk saying, quote, "Have fun with facts, trivia, puzzles, and more all about me and my job, President." Also in the book is background material on Mike Pence and a fun description of the role of Vice President. The issue goes beyond books. Even Shakespeare in the Park, the free, open to the public annual theater venue, has gone way overboard. This year, the first play to be produced was Julius Caesar. But in this performance, the central character, the character stabbed to death, Julius Caesar, is clothed in modern-day suit and wearing a blonde Trump wig. He is murdered by actors who are immigrants, women, and minorities. Some of the sponsors pulled their support. And then in the crazy world that we live in, the sponsors are being criticized for denying free speech to this free theater company. During several performances, protesters rushed the stage during the assassination scene. They were planned protests aimed at drawing attention to the vulgar interpretation of this classic play. The protesters were filmed, and their protests were uploaded directly to the web. The dialogue has moved from banter and debate to hate and incitement, justified with the tautological logic. It goes like this: I'm correct, so I can say anything about the people with whom I disagree. Recently, the New York Times ran the front page above the fold article posting that the contentiousness and animus have not been this bad since the Civil War. That might be an exaggeration, but not by much. We need to take a step back and look at ourselves. We need to return to a status where we can agree to disagree and talk about our differences. Once upon a time, we respected the people we debated. Today, we call them evil ignoramuses. Coming up, points of view. Here's what some important voices have been talking about. First up is a column from the Israeli daily Haaretz. Haaretz is left of center. They claim to be the Israeli New York Times. This piece is written by Yonah Lieberman. Lieberman is a Brooklyn-based organizer and founder of If Not Now. He's originally from Washington, D.C. He also has organized public education and political activism around racial and immigrant issues, as well as housing justice. This piece is called American Jews Have Enabled Israel's Occupation. Now We Must End It. It's subtitled, a very long subtitle. The U.S. Jewish community's support for the occupation has been critical for its brutal longevity, but it has also led to American Jews' moral erosion. It was published on June 15th, 2017. This is how Lieberman begins. The past month, I and other members of If Not Now participated in two powerful demonstrations against the Israeli occupation, timed with its 50th anniversary. Both of these actions, the construction of the Suman Freedom Camp in the southern Hebron Hills and the disruption of Jerusalem Day's March of the Flags, took place on occupied Palestinian land and included the leadership of American Jews from inception to execution. In his recent op-ed, Why American Jewish Activists Must Help, Not Headline Anti-Occupation Efforts, Michael Halpern criticizes diaspora Jews for what he perceives as an insensitivity to local political concerns in their protests, and argues that diaspora Jews don't believe that political reform is possible in Israel, which is what's led to diaspora Jews-led protests. Lieberman continues by saying this: he believes it is primarily our responsibility to shift the American Jewish community, but we must also support the Israeli and Palestinian movement building on the ground. The argument against him, by the way, and those like him, is clear. Halpern, representing the Israelis, says people like Lieberman from the outside of Israel must be sensitive to local issues. Lieberman responds to that. He is saying and trying to explain that his protests and he protests and why he wants to stop the occupation regardless of what local Israelis say. Lieberman continues saying that American Jews can influence the reality and actually stop the occupation. He writes, If Not Now is a movement to shift the American Jewish community away from supporting the occupation. We believe that our community plays a crucial role both in the politics on the ground and in the American arena. Any American effort to try to end the occupation without support of American Jewish community is likely to fail, not because American Jews are the sole or primary American supporters of the occupation, but because we are uniquely positioned to effect change. Lieberman concludes by inviting everyone to work together to fight the occupation, which he calls the greatest moral issue facing American Jewry in 50 years. He writes, It is clear that there is no greater moral issue facing American Jewish community than the way our communal institutions have supported occupation for 50 years. We are proud to have joined Israelis and Palestinians in protest against Israel's occupation. We plan to continue building the Jewish anti-occupation movement in the United States and continue to join with Israelis and Palestinians in greater numbers as the occupation enters its second half-century. Second up is a column from Business Insider. It was published on June 12, 2017, and is authored by Paul Zoldra. It's entitled, Israeli Hackers Reportedly Got into ISIS Networks and Found They Were Building Laptop Bombs. The essence of the piece is to show that Israeli hackers discovered that ISIS was planning to pack bombs and laptops and put them onto airliners. The info on the hack was originally on hackers' chat boards and then found its way into the mainstream news like the New York Times, which is the source of the quotes in this piece. This is how Zoldra begins. The Israeli government hackers broke into the computer networks of ISIS bomb makers months ago and uncovered the terror group's plan to build laptop bombs that could get through airport X-ray machines, according to a new report in the New York Times. The Times report, authored by David Sanger and Eric Schmidt, and sourced 2 American officials, said that the intelligence gleaned from the electronic heist was so exquisite that it helped U.S. spies get an understanding of how such devices would be detonated. Now Zoldra concludes by saying that the Israeli hack was just the beginning. Through the revelation uncovered by Israeli hackers is one success in the cyber war against ISIS. The Times report notes that the U.S. and others have had more difficult time going after the terror group online, unlike other cyber operations against Iran and North Korea, which caused setbacks to both countries' nuclear programs. ISIS has limited technical infrastructure and relies on technology less for weapons in favor of recruiting and propaganda efforts. Still, the U.S. has in recent years significantly upped its cyber capabilities and placed hackers close by grunts, helping them confuse and deceive the enemy on the battlefield. Coming up, commentary through cartoons where pictures tell the story. We're going to discuss 5 cartoons today. The first cartoon is called Crazy Kings. It was published on politicalcartoons.com on June 12, 2017. The artist's name is Jean-Michel Renaud. Leaders of the world, mostly evil leaders, are gathering around the U.S. President Trump. Kim Jong-un of North Korea, the Saudi king, Putin, Assad, they all have matches to light Trump's candle, which says 2017. Trump is lighting the candle with a cigar. At the same time, there's a wick to a bomb, and the bomb is actually the Earth. The point of the cartoon is clear. They are all in cahoots to destroy the world, a very strong and critical message. Next up is a cartoon by Ben Garrison, and it was published on June 10, 2017. It's entitled Death by Political Correctness. Sheep wearing flags of the nations of Europe are trotting into the mouth of a big, black, ugly wolf. The wolf is called Islam. As they are happily going into the mouth of death, the British sheep, which is the last sheep, says, "We're not wolfophobic," unquote. The sad reality is that this cartoon depicts the situation in Europe, where most of Europe is still incapable of realizing what is needed to defend themselves. They must define the threat and address it. Next up is a cartoon by Mike Lester from the Washington Post Writers Group. It was published on May 25, 2017. It pokes fun at the expression that Trump used to describe the terrorists. He called terrorists losers. There's a recruitment poster on the wall and the suicide bomber pointing at you like Uncle Sam and says, "I want losers." In the foreground is Trump walking away as if he put up the poster. Next up is a cartoon by Gary Varvel and Kegel Group. It was published on May 20th, 2017. There are 8 frames, and a Hamas terrorist is firing rockets into Israel. He shouts fire and shoots in the first 6 frames. Suddenly, in the 7th frame, there's a huge explosion. And in the final frame, the terrorist, now totally blown up, says, "Israel started it." So either Israel attacked him and hit him and his mortar, or his missile exploding on him. Either way, the message is the same. He blames Israel for what is clearly his doing. The 5th and final cartoon is from Powerline Blog. It depicts a big red emergency box. The instructions on the box, which would look like a firebox on a plane or a train, it reads, "In case of terrorist attack, break glass." There are 3 items behind the glass: a blue dove of peace, a note that says thoughts and prayers, and a note with a hashtag which also reads hashtag. The meaning is very clear and very sad. It suggests that we are woefully unprepared for terror attacks. In a moment, my own perspective and a few predictions. ISIS is losing their strongholds in Iraq and Syria. Israel sees these ISIS losses as a significant threat to their borders. ISIS fighters are being forced to flee and are relocating in areas closer and closer to Israel, like the Golan Heights. Israel's running cross-border exercises into Syria. As they run their exercises, Israel's gathering information and active intel on ISIS and the several dozen ISIS fighters that are now gathering in southern eastern part of the Syrian Golan Heights. In this area is the nexus between the borders of Jordan, Israel, and Syria. It's actually the area of the Yabok River, which is where the biblical patriarch Jacob wrestled with the angel. An elite unit of the Israeli Givati Brigade is in the Golan. The Givati unit is involved in the cross-border activity. Normally, Givati is headquartered in the south and specializes in the Gaza Strip, but they also train up north in the Golan to help out in the event that they may be needed there. Israel is preparing for infiltration or attacks by ISIS. Israel knows, and they must be prepared. Remember Tora Bora? That was Osama bin Laden's hideout, located in the mountains of Afghanistan. It sits nestled in a labyrinth of caves and tunnels. According to ISIS, they conquered Tora Bora and turned it into their own headquarters. The Taliban say it is not true. ISIS is locked in a fierce and deadly battle with Taliban right now in the area of Tora Bora. If ISIS successfully wrestles this bastion from the Taliban, they will not only have a nearly impervious hideaway, just as bin Laden had, but they will also have scored a colossal symbolic victory because bin Laden was ensconced there. ISIS will have out-Al-Qaeda'd Al-Qaeda. Even in the world of terrorists, it's all about location, location, location. Indonesia is the country with more Muslims than any other country in the world. Over 240 million Muslims live in Indonesia. The head of Indonesia's defense said that ISIS has sleeper cells in nearly every single province. General Gatot Nurmantio gave a press conference recently in Jakarta, in the Indonesian capital. He said, quote, "After observation, we see that in almost every province there are already ISIS cells, but they are sleeper cells." Nurmantio also said that these sleeper cells can easily join up with other radical cells. Indonesia is now joining forces with Malaysia and the Philippines to fight ISIS. They have come to the realization that they must stand up and root out ISIS. If they do not stop them, ISIS will continue to attack them on their own home front. Hamas sent a delegation to Egypt recently to discuss security in Gaza and Egypt. The delegation was led by the new head of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar. The group met with intelligence leaders in Cairo. Hamas is trying to mend fences with Egypt. Egypt has closed the border with Gaza and clamped down on the smuggling of people and goods in and out of Egypt and Gaza. Egypt has traced the arrival of weapons and terrorists from Gaza into Sinai, where they attacked Egyptian civilians and soldiers, and actually made their way to Cairo, where they had targeted civilians. Hamas leadership also met with Mohammed Dahlan. Dahlan was one of Arafat's strongmen in Gaza. Today he's a rival of PA President Abbas, and was actually convicted in absentia for offending Abbas. Not too long ago, Hamas also saw Dahlan as an arch enemy. He had to run away for his life after Hamas took power in the Gaza coup. This meeting is an attempt to bridge the gap. The BBC publicly issued a statement of regret, not apology, for a horrific headline that neglected to mention terror by Palestinians or the murder of an Israeli border policewoman in East Jerusalem. The false headline read, 3 Palestinians killed after deadly stabbing in Jerusalem. The BBC responded to the outrage and outcry from around the world, including a tweet from Donald Trump Jr., by the way, about how false the news was by issuing the following statement. We accept that our original headline did not appropriately reflect the nature of the events and subsequently changed it. Whilst there was no intention to mislead our audiences, we regret any offense caused. The storyline is upside down. According to the BBC, their headline, the most important element in the story was that 3 Palestinians were killed. Missing is the fact that 3 Palestinians were killed. They were terrorists, actually, and they were killed in the midst of a terrorist act perpetrated by them, during which they had murdered a young female Israeli soldier. Donald Trump Jr. tweeted, "You mean after they stabbed a female Israeli police officer to death, right?" This is as close to being misleading as possible. The BBC merely accepted the critique and regretted an offense. They did not deem it appropriate or necessary to issue an apology. As unacceptable as that is, the worst part of their non-apologetic statement is the assertion that they did not intend to mislead. There was no other possible motivation for the false headline than to mislead. The BBC intended to reshape the story and deflect responsibility from the murdering terrorists, Palestinians, and lay it at the foot of the Israelis. Imagine if the BBC had reported the terror at London Bridge as merely 3 Muslims killed in London by police. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. Did you know that the root for the word dialogue is both Latin and Greek? Dias means across, and logos or legis is words or spoken words. It means to speak across with words. The etymology of the word debate is not as positive. In today's English, debate is an art, even a sport. It's done with rules and with great respect. In the debate competition, the best ideas win. The word derives from the Latin. De, in this case, means down completely. Bait comes from the Latin word battere and batter. The word bat and batter in English, contemporary English, is exactly the same meaning. It means to beat or to hit. We need to engage in a more productive dialogue and discussion that relies on good ideas. We need to make certain that we elevate the debate and not descend into the ugly grime of ad hominem attacks. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.